Walter Dupree was 58 years old, and until that Friday evening, he believed his marriage, like everything else he had built, was something solid and enduring. He had spent 30 years as a civil engineer designing structures that would outlast him, raised a son he was proud of, and quietly accumulated more wealth than anyone in that banquet room suspected. He was the kind of man people respected, without quite noticing. Steady, precise, invisible in the way that reliable things are invisible. That night, his colleagues gathered to celebrate his retirement. His wife Diane stood up at the table in front of every person who had ever watched Walter Dupree do good work without complaint, and slid a legal envelope across the white tablecloth. Divorce papers, signed by her attorney, her brother. Walter picked them up and read every single page while 30 people held their breath. Then he borrowed a pen, signed his name on each marked line, buttoned his jacket, and walked out without a word. Diane thought she had just won. She had no idea that Walter had been watching for months, and that what he had already built in silence would cost her everything. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The box was not even half full. 30 years of work, and it all fit in a single cardboard box with room to spare. Walter Dupree stood in the middle of his office and looked at what he had gathered. A handful of framed photos, his drafting compass set in its worn leather roll, 2 commendation plaques from the city, a coffee mug Miles had painted for him in 3rd grade, and felt something he couldn't quite name. Not sadness, not regret, something quieter than both. He picked up the compass set first. The leather was soft from years of handling, the brass instruments inside dark with age, but perfectly maintained. He had used this set on his first real project, a drainage corridor on the east side of the city that most people drove over without a second thought. He had stood in the mud during the pour, in the rain, because he needed to see it done right. The project photos hung on the wall across from his desk, 12 of them, framed in simple black, arranged in the order they were completed. Bridges, interchanges, a flood-control channel that had protected 400 homes for 18 years without a single failure. He took them down one by one, wrapped each in the brown paper he'd brought from home. A knock at the open door. Terrence from Structural, a younger man with an easy smile and grease-stained fingers, leaned against the frame. "You're really doing it, huh?" "Seems that way," Walter said. "We're not going to know what to do with ourselves." "You'll manage." Terrence laughed, shook his hand with both of his, and left. It had been like that all morning. People stopping by, not with the stiff formality of obligation, but with the particular warmth of people who actually meant it. His division director had come in at 9 and stood in the doorway for 20 minutes, talking about nothing important and everything that mattered. 2 of the junior engineers, young women Walter had mentored through their first field seasons, brought him a card signed by the whole department. He read every name before he folded it carefully and put it in the box. He was not a man who performed gratitude. He simply felt it, stored it somewhere deep, and kept moving. By 11 o'clock, the office was empty of him. Just the furniture and the pale rectangles on the wall, where the photos had hung for so long, the paint behind them was still bright. Walter carried the box to his car, set it in the trunk with care, and stood in the parking lot for a moment in the October air. The sky was the particular gray of a city that knows winter is coming but hasn't committed yet. He thought about Diane, about the dinner tonight. She had handled the arrangements, the restaurant, the invitations, the seating, with the crisp efficiency she brought to everything social. She was good at it. She had always been good at it. Walter had told himself over the years that this was one of the ways they balanced each other. Her ease in rooms full of people, his ease in the work that paid for the rooms. Their house was full of beautiful things, things Diane had chosen carefully and arranged perfectly. The right art, the right furniture, the right light at the right time of evening. People came to dinner and left, talking about how lovely it all was. Walter had told himself for years that this was enough, that the quiet between them at breakfast was just what a long marriage sounded like, that the separate routines and the courteous silences were simply what happened when two people shared a life for long enough. He had not let himself examine that too closely. He was good at a great many things. Examining certain things was not among them. He was headed for his car when he heard his name. Gordon Tate was crossing the lot toward him, hands in his coat pockets, moving with the slightly reluctant posture of a man who has talked himself into saying something he would rather not have to say. "You got a minute?" Gordon said. Walter set the box on the trunk of the car. "Of course." Gordon stopped a few feet away. He looked at Walter, then away, then back. He had the expression of a man measuring the exact weight of what he was about to put down. "I don't know if this is my place," Gordon started. "Say it, Gordon." Gordon exhaled. "I've seen Diane 3 times in the past month. At Carver's, for lunch, with Preston." He paused. "And another man? Someone I didn't recognize. Each time they had documents on the table, like they were reviewing something." He paused again. "I almost didn't say anything. I kept telling myself it was nothing. But then I kept seeing it." Walter looked at him steadily. He did not change expression. "I appreciate you telling me," Walter said. "I don't know what it means." "I know." Walter picked the box back up. "I'll see you tonight." Gordon nodded and walked back toward the building. Walter put the box in the trunk and closed it. He was home by noon. The house was quiet. Diane was out. He moved through the rooms without turning on the lights, setting things down, hanging his coat. Then he went upstairs to the bedroom to rest before the dinner. At 5:30, he knotted his tie in the mirror, put on his jacket, and reached up to the top shelf of the closet for his cufflinks. His hand touched the small dish where they lived, then stopped. Behind the hat box, Diane kept on the top shelf, the one she hadn't touched in years. The edge of something was sticking out. A corner of manila, maybe an inch, maybe less. Walter reached past the dish and pulled it free. It was a folder. Inside were several pages, a typed asset inventory, neat columns, their house listed, his pension, his 401k, their jointly held rental property on Millward Street. The numbers in the columns were not the numbers Walter knew. They were smaller, much smaller. Annotated in the margins in handwriting Walter recognized immediately. Preston's small, precise print. The handwriting of a man who had spent 30 years writing in the margins of other people's documents. The date at the top of the first page was 4 months ago. Walter stood in the closet and read every page. Then he returned the folder to its exact position behind the hat box. Same angle, same depth, same half-inch of corner showing. He opened the small dish, put in his cufflinks, one and then the other. He went downstairs. Diane was in the kitchen in her blue dress, the one she wore when she wanted to look effortless. She looked beautiful. She always had. Walter crossed the kitchen, leaned down, and kissed her on the cheek. "Ready?" he said. "Almost." She checked her earring in the reflection of the cabinet glass. "You look nice." "Thank you." He picked up his keys from the counter. He held the door for her. She walked out ahead of him, and he followed, and he pulled the door shut behind them with a soft and certain click. The restaurant was called Harlow's. It had dark wood paneling and warm light, and tablecloths that were actually white, the kind of place you had to reserve 2 weeks out. Diane had chosen it. Of course she had. Walter held the door. Inside, the private dining room was already full. 40, maybe 45 people. His division director, Marcus Webb, talking with 2 of the senior engineers near the bar. The young women who had brought the card, Priya and Chandra, laughing together by the window. Gordon stood near the back, nursing something amber, and when he saw Walter, he lifted his glass once and said nothing else. That was Gordon. Miles was already seated. He stood when he saw his father come in, and the two of them shook hands and then held on a moment longer than a handshake, the way they did. Miles had Walter's build, broad through the shoulders, economical in his movements. He had his mother's eyes. "You look good, Pop." "So do you." Claudette was 3 steps behind Miles. She came in fast, the way she always moved, and grabbed Walter's face in both hands and kissed his forehead like he was still 9 years old. She smelled like the same perfume she'd worn his entire life. "My brother," she said. Just that. Like it was enough. It was. Diane moved through the room with practiced ease. A hand on an elbow here, a warm word there, a laugh that landed exactly right. Walter watched her work the room and felt the familiar mixture of admiration and distance. She was good at this. She had always been better at this than he was. He let himself be absorbed by the room, shook hands, answered the same question about retirement plans a dozen times with the same patient good humor, accepted a bourbon from Marcus, and held it more than he drank it. The table was long and set with candles. Walter sat at the center. Diane sat to his right. Miles sat to his left. Claudette sat across from Walter, close enough that he could see her face clearly in the candlelight. The toasts started after the salads. Marcus went first. He was a good speaker, measured, warm, specific. He talked about the flood control channel, the bridge project on Route 9, the 3 occasions Walter had caught critical errors in contractor submittals that would have cost the city significant money, and possibly lives. He said Walter was the kind of engineer the city built its trust on. The room applauded and meant it. 2 others followed. A man Walter had mentored 15 years ago. A woman from the planning department who had worked alongside him on the transit corridor expansion. Walter thanked each of them simply and quietly, and did not make a speech. He had never been comfortable receiving things. He accepted it the way he accepted most things, with steadiness, with genuine feeling kept just below the surface, where it belonged. Miles made a toast near the end. He stood with his water glass and looked at his father and said, "There's no one I've ever known who does the right thing as quietly as this man." His voice was steady. His jaw was tight. He sat back down and didn't say anything else. Walter looked at his son for a moment, then looked down at the table. Miles had noticed it by the second course. 3 times, then 4, then more than he could count. His mother's eyes dropping to her lap beneath the table's edge, the faint white glow of her phone screen lighting her face from below for a second or two before she put it away. Each time she looked up again, her expression was exactly the same. Composed, unreadable, arranged. He didn't say anything. He watched his father talk with Marcus across the table and laugh at something. A real laugh, easy. And he watched his mother check her phone again. The dessert plates were still being cleared when Diane stood. It was such a small, ordinary motion, pushing back her chair, rising, that it took a second for the room to register. Conversations tapered. Heads turned. People assumed she was going to add a toast. She had said nothing yet tonight, which was unusual for the woman who arranged all of this. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," she said. Her voice was warm, steady. She had the room completely. "Walter has given so much to this city, to this firm, to the people in this room. That deserves to be honored, and I'm glad we could do that together." She paused, reached into her purse. She placed a sealed legal envelope on the table in front of Walter, set it down with both hands. Flat, deliberate. "Walter and I have grown apart over the years," she said. "I think we both know that. I believe it's time for us to find our own paths forward." She looked around the table, not at Walter, but at the room. "I hope everyone will respect our privacy during this time." The room didn't freeze all at once. It went quiet the way an engine cuts out. One thing stopping, then another, then total silence. Miles rose halfway from his chair. He stopped himself. His hand was flat on the table. Across from Walter, Claudette's face went completely still. Not shocked. Something colder than shocked. Her eyes found Walter's and stayed there. Walter looked at the envelope. He picked it up, broke the seal cleanly with one finger, removed the documents, and unfolded them on the table in front of him. He read, not skimmed, read. Every page, every clause, every annotated figure. His eyes moved across each line the way they moved across a set of engineering plans, methodically, without hurry, missing nothing. The candles burned. The room stayed silent. 40 people watched a man read and did not make a sound. When he reached the last page, he folded the documents once, precisely, along their original crease. He looked to the man seated beside him. "May I borrow your pen?" The man produced one without a word. Walter signed each marked line. His handwriting was the same it had always been. Clean, unhurried, the signature of a man who had never once signed anything he hadn't read. He capped the pen and returned it. He squared the pages and slid the envelope back across the table to Diane. Then he stood. He buttoned his jacket. One button, then the other. He looked out at the room, at Marcus, at Gordon, at Priya and Chandra, at Claudette's still face and his son's white knuckles, and his expression was the same it had been all night. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he said. He walked toward the door. He did not look back at the table. He did not look back at Diane. He walked out of Harlow's the way he had walked out of every meeting where the work was done, with the particular quiet of a man who has said everything he needed to say and is already thinking about what comes next. The porch light was still on at Claudette's house. Walter pulled into the driveway at 10 minutes past midnight. He sat in the car for a moment with the engine off, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. The neighborhood was dark and quiet. Someone down the street had a television on behind a curtain. He went to the door. Claudette opened it before he knocked. She was still dressed. She had a glass of water in one hand, and she looked at her brother's face for exactly 1 second, then stepped aside to let him in. She didn't say anything. She just went to the kitchen. He sat at her table, the same table he had sat at for 30 years of Sunday dinners and holidays, and the occasional hard thing. The wood was worn smooth at the edges. There was a fruit bowl in the center that was always full, no matter when you came. He didn't know how she managed that. She set a glass of bourbon in front of him. Neat. 2 fingers. Then she sat across from him with her water and waited. Walter drank once, set the glass down, looked at the table. Then he began to talk. He talked about Diane the way you talk about someone you have genuinely loved, carefully, without venom, trying to be accurate rather than angry. He talked about the early years, the apartment with the bad plumbing, the way she used to leave notes in his lunch bag when he worked long hours. He talked about the slow drift that happened somewhere in the middle of things, the way the distance grew so gradually that he kept telling himself it was normal, that this was simply what long marriages became. "I believed that," he said. "For years, I actually believed that." Claudette said nothing. She let him go. He talked about Miles, about watching his son stand up at that table tonight with his jaw clenched tight and his water glass raised, and what it cost the boy to keep his voice steady. Walter went quiet for a moment after that. He pressed his thumb against the grain of the table and didn't speak. The grief was real. It was sitting right there in the room with them, heavy and undeniable. 28 years was not nothing. It was not something a man could fold up neatly and file away. Walter was not trying to do that. But grief was one thing. Decisions were another. He refilled his own glass once. Just once. Then he set the bottle aside and didn't touch it again. "I need to tell you what I know," he said. Claudette straightened slightly. "Then tell me." He started with Gordon's observation. The lunches with Preston. The third man at the table, The documents spread out between them. Walter had filed that away the moment Gordon said it, turning it over quietly while he smiled and shook hands and let people think he wasn't paying attention. Then the folder in the closet. He described it precisely. The manila envelope behind the hat box, the draft asset inventory in Preston's handwriting, the figures that bore no relationship to what anything was actually worth. He described putting it back at exactly the same angle, putting in his cufflinks, going downstairs. Claudette was very still. Her face was doing what it did when she was furious, but choosing not to be furious yet. "And I didn't say a word," Walter said, "because I didn't have the full picture yet." "What else?" Claudette said. 4 months ago, there was a transfer from our joint savings, $11,000. An account I didn't recognize." He paused. "I noticed it the same week I found the folder. I didn't confront it. I needed to understand what I was actually dealing with before I moved." Claudette set her water glass down slowly. "Walter, I know. How long have you been carrying this by yourself?" "Long enough." She looked at him the way only an older sister can look at a person, like she is seeing everything at once, the 9-year-old boy and the 58-year-old man and every version in between, and has decided she is not going to cry about any of it until later, in private, when it won't be about her. "What do you want to do?" she asked. Walter was quiet for a moment. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice and went still. "I want to know everything," he said. "All of it. Every piece." He looked at his sister across the worn table. "And then I want her, and everyone she brought into this, to get exactly what they deserve." He was back at the house by 7 the next morning. Diane was gone. A coffee cup sat rinsed in the dish rack. Her overnight bag was not in the closet. He stood in the bedroom doorway for a moment, looking at the made bed and the neat, empty surfaces, and then he moved on. He walked through every room, slowly, without purpose, beyond the walking itself. The living room, with its carefully chosen furniture. The study with his books on one wall and her design samples stacked on the shelves. The kitchen where they had eaten thousands of meals. The backyard, dry and quiet in the early morning light. 28 years. He let himself feel the full weight of it, room by room. Then he went back inside. He sat at his desk. He opened his laptop, and he began to work. Deborah Finch's office was on the 4th floor of a building that had no signage on the street. That was the first thing Walter liked about it. He had found her the same way he found anything he needed, methodically. 3 days of research, court records, bar association ratings, referral patterns from attorneys who had no connection to Preston's professional circle. He cross-referenced names until one appeared consistently in cases involving both family law and real estate disputes. Cases where the outcome reflected careful, documented work rather than performance. He called her office on a Tuesday. He had an appointment by Thursday. Finch was 60, or close to it. Short hair gone mostly silver. Reading glasses pushed up on her head. She shook Walter's hand with the grip of someone who had been underestimated in rooms like this one for 40 years and had stopped finding it interesting. She looked at the documents he placed on her desk. She did not rush. Walter sat across from her and let her read. He was good at that, at being still while someone else worked. Most people filled silence. Walter had never seen the point. After 12 minutes, Finch took her glasses down from her head and set them on the desk. "This isn't sloppy," she said. She tapped Preston's draft inventory with one finger. "The rental property valuation, the deferred compensation figures, these aren't errors." "No," Walter said. "They're not. Someone who understands real estate and retirement compensation law drafted these numbers." She looked at him directly. "They were designed to look like a starting position, something you'd negotiate down from. But the actual intent was to anchor the conversation around figures that serve one party. I know, The rental property is the centerpiece, Finch said. She flipped to the page with the property figure and turned it toward him. What's your honest assessment of what it's worth? At current market, conservatively, 2.5 times what's written there. Finch looked at him over her glasses. Based on? Based on 15 years of watching that corridor develop exactly the way I knew it would when I bought the building. He paused. And based on an independent appraisal I've already scheduled. Something in Finch's expression shifted. A small recalibration. She picked up her pen. Good, she said. Here's what we need. She worked through the list without hesitation. Independent appraisals on both the rental property and the family home. Full documentation of the deferred compensation package. Vesting records. Projected value. Every supporting statement going back to the beginning. The complete 6-year history of their joint accounts, with every transfer flagged and sourced. The $11,000 movement would need a paper trail attached to it, wherever it led. And the man who drafted this inventory, Finch said, setting down her pen, he's her brother? Her brother. Her attorney of record. Finch wrote something down. That creates a procedural problem for him that he may not have fully thought through. She didn't elaborate yet. She didn't need to. Walter nodded once and began gathering the documents back into order. I'll have everything to you within 10 days. Make it 8, Finch said. And, Mr. Dupree, don't contact your wife directly about any of this. Nothing. All communication goes through me. Understood. He stood to leave. Then he stopped. There's one more thing, Walter said. Separate from the divorce proceedings. I want to begin development on the rental property. Mixed use. I've been thinking about it for years, and I have a consultant I've worked with before. Finch looked at him. The property that's currently being undervalued in those papers. Yes. A pause. Then, the permit applications, once filed, become public record. Anyone paying attention to that corridor will see them. I know, Walter said. The corner of Finch's mouth moved. Barely. But it was there. I'll make sure our filings reflect the development timeline. She looked back down at her papers. 8 days, Mr. Dupree. He called Raymond Chu from the parking garage before he started his car. Raymond had consulted on 2 municipal corridor projects Walter oversaw in his final decade at the firm. A careful, precise man who understood how infrastructure investment shaped land value better than most developers half his age. Walter explained what he wanted. Not elaborate. Modest scale, mixed use, designed to fit the neighborhood that was already arriving rather than replace it. Built on the permits and relationships Walter had spent 30 years accumulating. Raymond asked a few sharp questions. Walter answered them without hesitation. How soon do you want to move? Raymond asked. Yesterday, Walter said. Raymond laughed. I'll pull together what we have on that corridor and call you Monday. Walter thanked him and hung up. He sat in the parking garage for a moment, looking at the concrete wall ahead of him. The building Rowan Abbott had circled for 2 years was about to become something Rowan Abbott would never have been capable of building. That wasn't the point. But it wasn't nothing either. He pulled out of the garage and drove home. His phone rang at 8:47 that evening. Miles. Walter answered on the second ring. Hey! Dad. Miles's voice was controlled. The specific kind of controlled that meant something was underneath it. Are you home? I am. Okay. A pause. I need to tell you something. I wasn't looking for it. I want you to know that. I was cleaning up old notifications on my phone from when Mom asked me to help set up her travel alerts a couple years back. I never removed myself from the account. Walter said nothing. He waited. There are 4 trips to Charleston, Miles said, over the last 2 years. The dates. She told us she was visiting Gwen each time, her college friend. Still, Walter said nothing. I ran the name she had listed as a contact on 2 of the alerts. Miles's voice tightened by 1 degree. Rowan Abbott. Dad? He's a commercial real estate developer. I went through 3 databases at work. It's what I do. I needed to know. A a breath. He's had a professional association with Preston for over 10 years, and he has active acquisition interest in properties in the exact corridor where your building sits. The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Walter looked at the table, then at the window above the sink. Dark now, the glass showing only the reflection of the kitchen light, and his own still face. "Save everything," Walter said. "Every notification. Every record you pulled. All of it. Already done." "Good work, son." Miles arrived at 7:30 with a folder under his arm and 2 coffees from the place on Renner Street. He didn't ring the bell. He still had his key. Walter was already at the kitchen table when he heard the door open. He had been up since 5. The kitchen smelled like fresh coffee and the particular quiet of a house where only one person lives now. Miles set the extra cup in front of his father and sat down across from him. He opened the folder. He did not say good morning. Neither did Walter. Some mornings didn't need it. "I printed everything," Miles said. He turned the first page toward his father. 4 trips, dates, destination, the contact name on the travel alerts. 2 of the 4 have Rowan Abbott listed directly. The other 2 list a property management company, Meridian Asset Group. He slid a second page across. Meridian is a shell. 1 registered agent. The agent is a paralegal who works in Preston's building. Walter looked at the page. He did not reach for it yet. "Abbott has been active in that corridor for at least 3 years, Miles continued. "I pulled his acquisition history from 2 commercial real estate databases and cross-referenced it with county filings." He set down a 3rd page. A grid, clean and organized. The kind of layout you build when you're used to presenting findings to people who need to understand them quickly. He targets properties in emerging corridors before public investment gets announced. He identifies them early, moves quietly, and acquires at below market before the broader market catches up. "He's good at it," Walter said. He was. Miles pointed to a line near the bottom of the grid. 18 months ago, he submitted an acquisition proposal on the Callaway property, 2 doors down from your building. The offer was 42% below the assessed value at the time. Walter looked at that line for a moment. "The owner rejected it," Miles said. "But the proposal is on file. I got a copy through a contact who works county records." He slid it across. It was 2 pages, professionally formatted, with Rowan Abbott's development company letterhead at the top. "That wasn't a real offer, Dad. That was a test." He wanted to know how the owners in that corridor were thinking about their properties, what they'd accept, what they understood about what they had. Walter picked up the Callaway proposal. He read it the way he read everything, all the way through, without rushing. Then he set it down squarely on top of the other pages. "He already knew what your building was worth," Miles said. "He knew before any of this started." "Yes," Walter said. "He did." Miles wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. He was quiet for a moment. "Mom didn't know the full picture, did she?" It was not quite a question. "I don't know how much she knew," Walter said. "She knew enough." Miles nodded once. He didn't push further. He closed the folder and slid it across to his father. The independent appraiser's report came back on a Wednesday. Walter read it at his desk, in the same chair where he'd opened his laptop 2 weeks earlier and started all of this. The rental property, 2.3 times Preston's drafted figure, just as Walter had told Finch it would be. The appraiser's language was careful and professional, current market value reflecting corridor development trajectory and infrastructure investment density. But what it meant was simple. Preston had put a number on that building that had no relationship to reality. None. The gap between Preston's figure and the appraiser's figure was not a negotiating margin. It was evidence. The deferred compensation report landed the same afternoon. Walter's package, which Preston's documentation had described, in careful legal language, as uncertain in projected value pending final vesting determination, was fully vested, had been fully vested for 14 months. Its documented worth, $340,000. Walter set both reports side by side on his desk. He looked at them for a long moment. Then he called Finch. She had already heard from Gordon by the time he reached her. Walter had called Gordon 2 days earlier, not to ask a favor, just to ask a question. Whether Gordon, through his municipal contacts, had heard anything about Rowan Abbott's acquisition activity in that corridor? Gordon called back in less than 24 hours. Finch relayed what Gordon had confirmed. The Callaway proposal was consistent with a pattern. Rowan had made 2 similar below-market approaches on properties within 4 blocks of Walter's building. All 3 came in within the same 6-month window. All 3 were declined. The pattern, to anyone who knew how to read it, was not an investor making offers. It was a developer mapping the terrain, testing the owners, determining who understood what they had. And Preston's name appeared in the professional association records tied to one of the other proposals, not as the attorney of record, but as a listed contact. He was feeding Abbott the intelligence, Finch said. And Abbott was returning the favor in the form of valuation guidance. Yes, I've documented Preston's conflict of interest violations, Finch said. Representing a family member in adversarial proceedings requires specific disclosures filed with the court. He didn't file them? Not one. A pause. That's not an oversight. That's someone who assumed no one was going to look. They assumed correctly, Walter said. Until now. What do you want our posture to be going forward? Walter leaned back in his chair. Cooperative. Completely. Respond to everything professionally. On time, without hostility. Agree to mediation whenever they propose it. You want Preston confident. I need Preston confident. Finch made a note. Understood. Claudette called that evening just after 9. I just got off the phone with Diane, she said without preamble. She had a way of delivering information like that. Straight in, no softening. All right, Walter said. She called to check in. Very warm. Very sisterly. A pause. She said she expected you to be making things difficult by now. She seemed, I don't know, almost let down that you weren't. Walter said nothing. She told me you were always too predictable, Claudette said. Too steady. She said those exact words. Too predictable. Said you never had it in you to be bold when it mattered. The kitchen was quiet. Walter could hear the low sound of a car passing outside. She's telling herself a story, Claudette said. The one where she already knows how this ends. Good, Walter said. Let her keep thinking that. The mediation office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city that was probably meant to feel neutral, professional. The kind of room where reasonable people reached reasonable agreements. Preston did not enter the room like a reasonable person. He entered like a man arriving to collect something already owed to him. He wore a dark gray suit, pocket square. His briefcase was leather, the expensive kind that doesn't creak. He set it on the table with a soft, deliberate thud and began unpacking it immediately. Tab-divided folders arranged in a neat row, a printed presentation bound with a black spine, 2 pens placed parallel to a legal pad. Everything staged, everything ready. The setup of a man who had already decided how this meeting would go. Diane sat to his left. She looked composed, elegant, the way she always was in rooms full of people who were watching. Her hands were folded on the table and she did not look at Walter when he came in. Walter set his binder on the table and sat down across from her. Finch sat beside him. She uncapped her pen and wrote the date at the top of her legal pad. That was all. The mediator, a trim woman in her 50s, named Carol Reeves, opened with the standard language. Purpose of the session. Ground rules. The intention to reach a voluntary resolution. Preston nodded along with the patience of a man waiting for the formalities to end. He presented his terms with the rhythm of someone who had rehearsed them. He walked through each point using the bound presentation, sliding a copy toward Walter and Finch as he spoke. Diane would receive the family home at current assessed value. 60% of all liquid marital assets, a significant share of Walter's pension. Preston used the word equitable 4 times in 3 sentences, and a right of first purchase on the rental property, at the assessed figure from the draft inventory. Preston's assessed figure. Given the property's current standing and the uncertainty around its development potential, Preston said, "We believe this represents a fair and realistic valuation. One that reflects the actual market." He said, "Actual market," the way people say things they know to be false, but have said often enough that it no longer registers as lying. He looked at Walter when he said it. Not at Finch, at Walter. A look that carried in it 20 years of a particular contempt. The kind that doesn't need words because it has been fully expressed in every interaction prior to this one. Carol Reeves turned to Walter's side of the table. "Mr. Dupree, would you like to respond?" Walter opened his binder. He did not speak immediately. He found the first document with the unhurried efficiency of a man who knows exactly where everything is because he put it there himself. He placed the independent appraisal on the table and slid it toward the center. "The rental property," he said. "Independently assessed. Current value." He waited 1 beat, just long enough for Preston to look at the number on the cover page. Then he placed the second document beside it. "The family home. Same independent appraiser. Same methodology." Preston's eyes moved between the 2 pages. Something shifted in his expression. Small, barely visible, a tightening. Walter placed the deferred compensation report on the table. "My retirement package, fully vested, has been for 14 months. He set it down squarely. "Not uncertain. Not pending. Documented." He reached into the binder again. "This is a letter from the State Bar of this state," Walter said. He placed it precisely beside the other documents. "It outlines the specific disclosure requirements for an attorney representing a family member in adversarial divorce proceedings, the required filings with the court." He paused. "Those disclosures were never filed." The room was very quiet. Preston had stopped looking at the documents. He was looking at Walter now, with an expression that was trying very hard to remain composed and not entirely succeeding. Walter reached for the final document. "This is a summary prepared by my development consultant," he said. "It covers the preliminary permit approvals and the projected return on a mixed-use development of the rental property." He set it down. "The application process began 6 weeks ago. The preliminary approvals are already in hand." He looked across the table. "That building is not part of this settlement discussion. It was never going to be." Preston opened his mouth, closed it. He looked down at the documents spread across the table. The real numbers, the real vesting record, the State Bar letter, and the prepared presentation in his bound folder became, in that moment, a document from a version of this meeting that was never going to happen. Carol Reeves said carefully, "It appears both parties may benefit from time to review the new materials before continuing." Mediation concluded 20 minutes later. Nothing resolved. Nothing agreed. Diane stood without speaking. She picked up her bag. She did not look at Walter, but just before she turned toward the door, something moved across her face. Not quite recognition. Not quite fear. Something that looked like the beginning of a very unpleasant understanding. Preston packed his folders back into his briefcase. His movements were slower than when he'd arrived. Walter and Finch rode the elevator down in silence. In the lobby, Finch said she would be in touch. Walter drove home. He sat at his desk. The afternoon light was flat and gray through the window. He pulled open the bottom drawer and lifted out the accordion folder where he kept the tax returns. 6 years of them, paper-clipped and ordered. The way he kept everything. He had not gone through them yet. Not carefully. Not the way something like this required. He opened the first return and began to read. The tax returns went back 6 years. Walter started with the most recent, and worked backward. He did not rush. He had a yellow legal pad beside him and a mechanical pencil, the same kind he had used at the firm for 30 years, and he made notes the way he always made notes. Small, precise. One fact per line. Miles arrived around 7 with 2 coffees and his laptop. He didn't ask if Walter needed help. He just sat down at the other end of the desk, opened the machine and said, "What are we looking at?" "Diane's consultancy," Walter said. 6 years. I want every expense she filed against it. Miles nodded and started typing. The consultancy was called Dupree Interiors. Diane had started it 11 years ago. A small interior design practice, mostly referral work, a few modest commercial clients. It had never made serious money. Walter had never questioned it. It was her work, her effort, her clients. He had signed the joint tax returns each year, the way he signed most things in their shared life. Carefully, but without suspicion. That, he was beginning to understand, had been the mechanism. The first thing he found was the vehicle mileage. Diane had claimed a personal SUV, the one she drove to grocery stores and dinner parties and Preston's house, as a business vehicle for 4 of the 6 years. Full deduction, roughly $6,400 per year across those 4 years. Walter wrote it down. Then the travel. 4 trips listed as client site visits in the consultancy records. 2 to Charleston, 1 to Savannah, 1 to Atlanta. Walter pulled up the dates against the household calendar he had kept on his phone for years. Family obligations, Miles's college visits, the vacation they had taken to the coast in 2019. The Charleston trips were the same dates Miles had flagged. The same dates Diane had told the family she was visiting a college friend. Walter set his pencil down. He picked it up again. "Dad." Miles's voice was quiet and flat. The voice he used when he had found something he did not want to have found. "Look at this." He turned his laptop around. It was a database record, corporate filings, publicly accessible. Dupree Interiors had listed a paid consultant on 11 separate project invoices across the past 6 years. The consultant was listed as providing design research and market analysis services. The name on the invoices was Preston Okafor. Walter looked at the screen. Then he looked at the relevant tax year in the return open in front of him. Preston's consulting fees were there, deducted as a legitimate business expense. Modest amounts per invoice, consistent. The kind of number that didn't draw attention. "Pull the others," Walter said. Miles pulled them. All 11 invoices. Walter cross-referenced each one against his own files. The project records Diane had shared with him over the years, the client names he had heard mentioned at dinner, the handful of jobs he had helped her transport materials for. Preston appeared on none of them. Not once. His name was not in a single client email Walter could find. Not in a single project photo. Not in any correspondence connected to any of the jobs his fees had been attached to. Miles leaned back in his chair. He didn't say anything. Walter added the total consulting fees across 6 years. Then he added the fraudulent vehicle deductions, the personal travel, 2 home renovation expenses, their kitchen in 2020, the master bathroom in 2021, filed as business property improvements. He wrote the final number at the bottom of the page and underlined it twice. $78,240. He set the pencil down again and left it there. The house was very quiet. Miles had stopped typing. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator down the hall, and, somewhere outside, a car passing slowly through the wet street. Walter sat with it. Not the number. The number was just a number. He would deal with the number. What he sat with was the architecture of it. 6 years. Sustained over 6 years. Through tax seasons and dinners and Sunday mornings, and the ordinary 1,000 moments of a shared life. She had looked at him across tables, accepted his signature on joint returns, received his steady, unquestioning trust, and used it. His reliability had not been incidental to the fraud. It had been the condition that made the fraud possible. He had funded it. Every dollar he earned, every project he delivered, every year he built their financial foundation. He had been building the account she was quietly draining. He allowed himself to feel the full weight of that. He sat in it for a long time. Miles did not try to fill the silence, which was the right thing. Walter had raised a son who understood when silence was necessary. After a while, Walter pulled the legal pad toward him and wrote 3 names at the top of a clean page. Finch, forensic accountant, IRS field contact. He made the calls the next morning. Finch picked up on the second ring. Walter read her the totals and described the structure. She was quiet for a moment, then said she knew a forensic accountant. Thorough, fast, well-regarded in financial fraud cases. She would make the introduction by end of day. The forensic accountant answered his email within 2 hours and had a call scheduled for that afternoon. The IRS field office contact, a man named Dennis Harwell, whom Walter had worked alongside on public works compliance reviews for 15 years, listened without interrupting. Then he said he appreciated Walter bringing it to him directly and asked him to send the documentation when it was ready. Walter said it would be ready within the week. He did not call Diane. He did not call Preston. He made no attempt to reach Rowan Abbott. He simply returned to his desk, opened the accordion folder, and added the annotated tax records to the architecture. Precisely ordered, fully documented, placed where they belonged alongside everything else. Then he picked up the phone one more time and called his development consultant. "The permit timeline," Walter said. "Where are we?" He listened. He made 2 notes on his legal pad. He confirmed 2 dates. Everything was in position. Finch filed on a Tuesday. Walter was at his kitchen table with coffee when she called to confirm. She walked him through each item the way a surgeon describes an operation. Calm, sequential, nothing left out. The independent appraisals, the deferred compensation records with full vesting documentation, the development consultant's summary, the approved preliminary permits, the projected return figures, all of it submitted to the court in a single, clean filing that left no room for interpretation. The state bar complaint went in at the same time, Finch said. "I wanted everything to land together." Walter said, "Good." He meant it. Precision mattered. You did not fire warning shots. You built the structure completely, and then you placed every load where it belonged, all at once, and you let the weight do what weight does. The forensic accountant's name was Carl Bester. He was a small, quiet man who communicated almost entirely by email and whose reports read like engineering documents, numbered findings, cited evidence, no wasted language. Walter respected him immediately. Bester's report landed at the IRS field office and the State Financial Authority on Thursday of the same week. 41 pages, 6 years of false filings, the consultancy vehicle deduction, the personal travel, the kitchen renovation, the bathroom, all of it run through Dupree Interiors as business expenses. Preston's 11 invoices for work that did not exist, attached to projects he had never touched, totaling $78,240 across 6 tax years. Dennis Harwell at the IRS called Walter that afternoon. He said only, "We have it. Thank you for being thorough." Walter thanked him and hung up. The letter to Rowan Abbott went out Friday morning. Finch had drafted it with the careful, formal language of someone who had done this before. No accusations beyond what the evidence supported, no drama, no warnings dressed as courtesy. It identified Rowan as a knowing participant in a coordinated asset valuation scheme connected to an ongoing divorce proceeding. It cited specific transactions. It named the fraudulent appraisal figures and their relationship to Rowan's prior acquisition probe on the neighboring property. It stated plainly that the matter had been referred to a colleague specializing in financial fraud in civil proceedings and was now part of the formal legal record. It was not a threat. It did not need to be. Walter learned what happened next through Gordon, who had his own sources and no particular reason to keep them quiet. Rowan received the letter Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, he had called Preston twice. Preston did not answer either call. By the following morning, Rowan had quietly withdrawn from 2 active acquisition deals, both in development corridors that required city infrastructure review. His attorney had apparently been direct with him about the civil liability exposure. The words "known participant" in a fraud referral, attached to his name in a permanent legal document, were the kind of words that moved fast in a market built on professional trust. And the 2 development proposals Rowan had submitted, the ones requiring city infrastructure review, entered the review process that week. The reviewers were thorough. They were experienced. They followed every procedural step exactly as those steps were meant to be followed. There was nothing improper about the timeline. It simply took the time it took. Gordon told Walter about the withdrawn deals over the phone. He did not editorialize. He just reported the facts the way he had always reported facts, plainly, without decoration. Walter listened and said, "I appreciate that." "I know," Gordon said. And that was the end of it. The State Bar notification reached Preston on a Wednesday. Walter did not witness what happened next. He did not need to. Claudette called him that evening, her voice carrying the particular quiet of someone who has just heard something that confirmed everything she already knew. Preston had called Diane. Claudette's source was a mutual friend who had been in the room with Diane when the call came in. Close enough to hear Preston's voice coming through the phone. Tight and fast, and nothing like the controlled, measured tone he performed for courtrooms and dinner parties. He told Diane the complaint was serious, that the conflict of interest violations were documented completely, and he had no procedural ground to stand on. That Walter had retained someone who knew exactly what she was doing and had clearly been building the case for months. And then he said something Claudette's source remembered word for word. "He was never the man you described to me, Diane. Not once in this entire process has he done a single thing I expected him to do." There was a silence on the call after that. A long one. Claudette passed it along without commentary. Walter listened, set the phone down after they said goodbye, and sat for a moment in the kitchen. He did not feel satisfaction. Not exactly. What he felt was closer to the quiet that comes at the end of a very long calculation, when the last number confirms what you already knew the answer would be. Diane called the next morning. Her voice was controlled, but only just. She asked if they could meet. No attorneys, just the 2 of them. Walter looked out the kitchen window at the gray February light sitting flat on the backyard. "At the house," he said. "Saturday, 10 o'clock. A pause. Then, "Okay." Walter hung up and wrote the date on his legal pad. Walter arrived 40 minutes early. He had his key, though he wasn't sure how much longer that would be true. He unlocked the front door and stepped inside, and stood in the entryway for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the light. The house was quiet in the particular way of a place that has been lived in for a long time by people who stopped really living together somewhere along the way. The furniture was the same. The framed prints on the hallway wall were the same. The faint smell of the cedar closet near the stairs, the way the morning light came through the kitchen window and fell across the counter in a long, pale stripe. All of it exactly the same as it had been for 20 years. Walter walked through slowly. He was not sentimental about it. He was not trying to be. But he was deliberate, the way he was deliberate about everything. He wanted to see it clearly, one final time, before the business of the morning made that impossible. He stood in the kitchen doorway. He looked at the table. 2 chairs facing each other across a surface where they had eaten 10,000 meals, argued about small things, sat in comfortable silence, and eventually sat in a silence that was not comfortable at all, but that neither of them had ever broken open to examine. He pulled out the chair closest to the window and sat down. He set his folder on the table in front of him. He waited. Diane arrived at 10:05. She came through the front door with the composure of a woman who had prepared carefully. The right coat, the right posture, the expression she wore when she was managing a room. Walter had seen that expression at dinner parties, at school events, at every social occasion across 28 years. He knew it well. She sat down across from him without being invited to. She placed her hands flat on the table, one over the other, and looked at him directly. "Walter," she said. Not a question. A signal that she was ready. Walter opened the folder. He did not raise his voice. He did not lean forward for emphasis. He simply began, the way he began every technical briefing he had ever delivered. At the beginning, in sequence, with the evidence in front of him and nothing left to interpretation. The folder in the closet. 4 months before the retirement dinner, Preston's handwriting, figures that bore no relationship to actual market values. The $11,000 transferred out of their joint savings into an account he did not recognize. He had noticed it immediately. He had not confronted it immediately because he was still assembling the picture and he needed to understand what he was actually dealing with before he moved. He watched her face as he spoke. She was very still. Charleston. 4 trips across 2 years. The dates she had told the family she was visiting a college friend. Rowan Abbott. His development history. His decade-long association with Preston. His below-market acquisition probe on the neighboring property 18 months ago. The fraudulent appraisal figures in Preston's draft. The specific transactions connecting Rowan's valuation work to the divorce filing. Diane's hands tightened on the table, but she did not speak. 6 years of false filings through Dupree Interiors. The personal expenses. Preston's 11 invoices for work he never performed. $78,240. He had used his own income to fund it. His own reliability had been the mechanism. She had needed him to keep working, keep trusting, keep not looking. And he had, because that was who he was, and she had known exactly who he was when she built the arrangement around him. He set the last page down. Silence. Then Diane spoke. Her voice was controlled at first, but it moved fast toward something rawer. She talked about the marriage, the years she felt invisible, the dinners where Walter was present in body and somewhere else entirely, the way she had watched her own ambitions quietly compress into a life that never felt fully hers. She said she knew none of that justified what happened, but she needed him to understand that it didn't come from nowhere. She said his name twice, differently the second time. She mentioned Miles, and then she cried. Real tears, not performed ones, the kind that come from genuine grief mixed with the specific panic of watching everything collapse at once. Walter watched her. He felt the weight of it. He did not look away. When she finished, he said, "I hear you. The marriage had real problems. I know that. Some of them were mine." He paused. "But that's not what we're here about." His voice was quiet and completely even. He told her the fraud referral would proceed regardless of anything she did now. Preston's bar complaint would proceed. The rental property development was already in motion and was not part of any settlement conversation. Not now, not ever. The divorce settlement would reflect accurate valuations and would account for the fraudulent transfers. She would receive a fair share of everything they had legitimately built together across 28 years. Not a dollar more. Not a dollar of what had been taken from him. Diane stared at the table. Walter looked at her. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then he said it. "I loved you for 28 years. I would have given you anything you asked for." He stopped. "You didn't have to take it. You chose to. That's the part I'll spend a long time trying to understand." He closed the folder. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and told her she could reach him through Finch. Then he walked out of the house. Miles was parked at the curb in his dark blue sedan. Engine off. Walter opened the passenger door and got in. Neither of them spoke for a while. The neighborhood was quiet. A dog barked somewhere down the block and then stopped. A car passed. Miles broke the silence first. His voice was careful and steady, the way Walter had always taught him to be careful and steady. "You okay?" Walter looked at his son, 26 years old. His mother's jaw, his father's eyes. A young man who had taken everything the last several months had asked of him and had not broken under any of it. "I will be," Walter said. Miles nodded once. He started the car. They drove. The settlement was finalized on a Tuesday in November. No courtroom drama, no final confrontation, just Finch calling Walter at 8:15 in the morning to tell him it was done. Diane's side had signed without further contest. Walter was at his kitchen table with coffee when the call came. He said thank you, set the phone down, and sat for a moment with both hands wrapped around the mug. That was it. 28 years, and that was it. He finished his coffee. Then he got up and went to work. The rental property came to him at accurate valuation, the real number, the one confirmed by 2 independent appraisers, not the figure Preston had invented in a folder hidden behind a hat box. The majority of their liquid assets followed, adjusted to account for the documented fraudulent transfer. The pension arrangement Diane had specifically targeted was untouched. Clean separation. Exactly as Finch had built it. The family home sold in the spring. Walter took his half and did not look back at it. Preston's state bar censure was issued quietly, the way those things always are. A formal document, a notation in a professional record, a reality that spreads through a community not through announcement, but through the particular efficiency of people who pay attention to such things. The 6-month suspension came with it. At 57, in a mid-sized city where a legal career runs on relationships and reputation, a censure does not announce itself loudly. It simply settles. Clients who were already uncertain found reasons to move their business. Referrals slowed. The social adjacencies that had given Preston his sense of standing, the dinners, the introductions, the easy authority of a man well connected in the right circles, began to thin at the edges in ways that were hard to point to directly, but impossible to miss. He was not finished, but he was not what he had been. And he knew it. That was the part that mattered. The IRS audit took 4 months and found exactly what the forensic accountant had found. 6 years of false filings, personal expenses passed through a business account, a paid consultant who had never performed a single hour of work. The back assessments came first. The penalties followed. The repayment obligation for $78,000 plus interest landed on both Diane and Preston, proportional to their documented participation. Diane's consultancy was closed before the audit concluded. There was nothing left in it worth sustaining. Rowan Abbott's consequences came more slowly, which was appropriate. Patient men deserve patient outcomes. The civil exposure from Finch's fraud referral was real enough that his attorney's fees across the following year were considerable. The 2 active acquisition deals he had quietly withdrawn from in the days after the referral letter arrived, those were gone, and the investors attached to them were not interested in re-engaging with a man whose name had appeared in a formal fraud record. The municipal infrastructure reviews moved at their own pace, thorough, procedurally correct. The kind of careful, unhurried work that gets done properly when the right people are paying attention. 2 of Rowan's corridor development proposals did not survive the timeline. By the time approval might have come, the financing windows had closed, and Gordon, in the way of a man with 30 years of professional relationships and absolutely no need to rush, had conversation at association meetings, over coffee, in the measured back-channel exchanges of people who have built trust across decades and know exactly what a well-placed word is worth. Nothing slanderous, nothing exaggerated, just the truth, offered to the right people at the right time, in the right rooms. Rowan Abbott submitted fraudulent valuations in connection with a divorce proceeding. He targeted a retired city engineer. He was caught. That was all it took. That was always all it took. Walter broke ground on the mixed-use development 14 months after the retirement dinner. He did not make a ceremony of it. He showed up in work boots and a jacket and stood with his development consultant and reviewed the site plan one more time, and then the equipment moved and the work began. He visited twice a week, sometimes more. He knew the names of the crew foremen. He brought coffee on cold mornings. He answered questions in the direct, unhurried way of a man who understood exactly what was being built and why each decision had been made. The building that rose in that corridor was modest in scale and correct in every particular. The kind of structure that fits a neighborhood without forcing itself on it, that serves people without announcing itself. Walter had designed its development the same way he had designed everything in his career. With precision, with patience, with the understanding that work done right does not need to be loud. Rowan Abbott watched it go up from across the city. The asset he had identified years before Walter's retirement. The building he had spent 2 years positioning to acquire at a price designed to make him wealthy. The property he had arranged a fraud, an affair, and a public humiliation to obtain. It stood completed. It belonged entirely, irrevocably, to the man he had helped betray. There was nothing to do with that except live with it. Walter bought a house 2 neighborhoods over from the building. Good bones, needed work, the kind of place that rewarded attention. He did most of the renovation himself, on his own schedule, at his own pace. He learned to cook properly, somewhat late in life, and found that he was better at it than he expected. He took the trip to West Africa. 3 weeks. He had mentioned it once, 15 years ago, at a dinner party. Offhand, the kind of thing a person says when they are briefly, quietly themselves. And Diane had said it was probably not worth the cost. He went alone and came back changed in the small, private way that real travel changes people. He did not talk about it much. He didn't need to. He and Miles had dinner every Sunday. Claudette came twice a month and brought food regardless of what Walter said about it, and he had stopped saying much about it because the food was good and the company was better. Gordon retired 8 months after Walter, and they began consulting together. Municipal infrastructure work, their own terms, exactly as much as they wanted, and no more. The building opened on a Tuesday morning in early spring, 16 months after the night Walter had walked out of a restaurant and left a signed envelope on a table in front of the woman who had planned to take everything he built. He stood in front of it, with Miles and Gordon and Claudette, in the particular gray light of a city beginning its day. Miles had a coffee. Gordon had both hands in his jacket pockets and was looking at the building the way men who build things look at finished work. Not admiringly, exactly, but with the quiet recognition of something done correctly. Claudette stood beside Walter with her shoulder touching his, the way she had stood beside him since they were children. Nobody made a speech. Nobody needed to. Walter looked at the building for a long moment. Then he took a sip of his coffee. Later, after Miles had gone to work and Gordon had driven off and Claudette had kissed Walter on the cheek and told him she'd see him Sunday, Walter walked the 2 neighborhoods back to his house. He sat on the front steps with the last of his coffee going cold in his hand. The morning was moving around him. A neighbor walked a dog. A delivery truck rumbled past. Somewhere down the block, a child was being called inside. The small, ordinary machinery of a neighborhood waking up and getting on with itself. Walter sat in the middle of it and did not perform anything for anyone. He was not triumphant. He was not bitter. He was not waiting for something to feel different than it felt. He was simply himself. Entirely, finally, without apology or explanation, himself. He sat there until his coffee was cold. Then he went inside. "I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.